Hey, hello everyone. Happy Wednesday. Happy Career Month. It's so nice to have you folks here and welcome to those who are joining us online. My name is Kimberly Daniels. My pronouns are she and her. I am the manager for equity and student life, and I am so excited to be here as a person who loves to chat and as a person who loves hearing from others and them sharing their stories. I know today is going to be really exciting. So thank you, Stacy, for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Before I get into some introductions for Stacy, I did want to just take a moment to acknowledge the land that we're on. This week on Monday was also Transgender Day of Remembrance, and as I reflect that we come together during TDOR as a community to raise awareness around transphobia and the violence that the trans community experiences, resulting in hate crimes and multiple lives lost, I'm also reflecting on how interconnected we all are. And so I encourage everyone to take a moment, feel your feet on the ground, hear those around you, feel your breath that you're breathing, and remember that this land that we are on, we are guests on this land, and it is important for us not only to take care of the land, but to take care of each other. So Humber College is located within the traditional and treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, known as Etobicoke, the place of the alders in Michisagic language. The region is uniquely situated along Humber River watershed, which historically provided an integral connection for Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples between the Ontario Lakeshore and the Lake Simcoe and Georgian Bay regions. Now home to people of numerous nations, Etobicoke continues to provide a vital source of interconnection for all. Okay, so now I am going to introduce Stacy. So Stacy Lee Kong is a writer, editor, and founder of Friday Things, a weekly newsletter that delivers smart takes on the week's biggest pop culture stories, or at least the ones that she can't stop thinking about. Her bylines have appeared in publications including Maclean's, the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, Reader's Digest, and The Kit, and she has worked at some of the largest magazine brands in Canada, including Flair, Canadian Living, House and Home, and Chatelaine. She is also a journalism instructor at Centennial College in Toronto, and I am so excited that you're here with us. So please join me in welcoming Stacy Lee Kong.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so let's just get into it.
Let's do it.
Let's chat. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your career journey?
Okay, so I graduated in 2007 from Guelph Humber, and I thought that I was just gonna go get a job. Unfortunately, there was a massive recession in 2008, so I did not just go get a job. Instead, I did a bunch of internships. So before I graduated, I did an internship at This Magazine, which is a really small political left-wing magazine. And then after I graduated, I went to Style at Home, Toronto Life, and then Chatelaine. And then I freelanced for a year at places that I had interned for, making like $7. It was not a lot of money, so I lived at home and then tried to kind of build up my career in that way, like doing freelance work, stressing my parents out. Like I was born in Trinidad. My parents were extremely stressed out during this whole time. But then it started to pay off. So Chatelaine, about a year later, called me and said they needed an editorial assistant, which is like the very bottom of the masthead, but I needed a job. So I took that job and then did that for about a year, and then they promoted me to assistant editor, and then I went to a different department. At the time, that was owned by Rogers Publishing. So I went to a different department in Rogers that was working with all of the magazines. Then I went to House and Home, where I was features editor. Then I went to Canadian Living, where I was senior editor. And then I got laid off, which is actually very normal. The layoffs are quite normal within journalism. It was kind of unique for me that I had made it 10 years into my career without getting laid off. But I also, from there, ended up just staying freelance. So I've technically been self-employed since 2017. I did a couple of years of contract work at Flair magazine, but in addition to that, I had a whole bunch of other clients. So I do editing for the Globe and Mail. I do editing for Pivot magazine, which is it's a magazine, like a trade publication basically, which is for Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada. And I do a bunch of writing. I do some like copywriting for corporate clients. that as well.
Okay, wow.
That was a lot of things. Sorry. I was like, do you want an A to Z story? Because I will always tell you an A to Z story.
And I love that you started by saying, like, I was going to graduate and I was just going to go get a job, and like then I was just going to live life, and that's not really how it works. And so I love that you kind of highlighted that whole journey, because I think it's important for folks to know that there is going to be like ebbs and flows in a career journey.
Absolutely.
And that it isn't really just like a simple, I'm done school, I go get a job, and I live my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about how you've moved into doing, freelance, and you've been self-employed for the last little while. Why did you make that decision? Like, at what point did you decide, like, hey, I want to try this on my own. I want to do this on my own.
So I think I didn't really decide. I think it was more that I was laid off and there weren't any jobs that were available at that time that I was really interested in. And I think it was just me being like, oh, maybe it's possible that I can do this on my own. I will along. So it was a lot easier to build up clients in that way, and then it just kept working. So every year I'm like, am I still gonna do this? Because it is I will say, because I responsible for
Think that can always be an easy space. And so I'm wondering if you could maybe chat with us a little bit about your experience there.
Absolutely. So I think first of all, it's important to recognize that, like, yes, I am moving through Canadian media, which is very white and very male, as a woman of color. And I'm also like, I'm 38, but people don't always perceive me as 38. So there's a bit of like an age aspect to that too. I think it's important to note though that I'm still relatively privileged. I am light skinned. I don't have an accent. I grew up here. I wasn't born here, but I grew up here. So there's all of these things that make it easier for me to move through these spaces. I think it's important more shut out of these spaces and even more facing even larger challenges. That being said, it's not like easy necessarily to be a woman of color in Canadian media. I think there are some of the things that we've talked about a lot, which is we're not always trusted to tell stories. We're not always trusted as our lived experience is not necessarily perceived as a strength or a skill or a benefit. It's instead often perceived as a detriment to us. So that's a big thing. But I think this other thing that has been a theme throughout people always want me to work for them. They don't always want, though, to give me the credit, and they don't always want to give me the pay. So a theme that I've seen over and over We really want you to edit. We really want you to bring in your stable of diverse writers. We really want you to, bring your perspective. But when it comes time to actually give me decision-making power, that is less interesting. Gone for 3 senior level jobs. Some of them I had been asked to apply for, some of them I just applied for. And in each case, I made it to the top 2 candidates. And in each case, I didn't get the job, and the feedback I received was about like fit or experience, but I had a real crisis of confidence. Like my entire career, I had been told that I'm really good at this. I'd gotten good performance reviews. In the space of like 6 months where I was like, oh, all of that feedback, like, was that even true? Am I good at this? Can I do? And I instead am not getting that. And I had like really honest conversations with my friends within journalism and outside of journalism to be like, I need you to tell me if I'm bad at this. Like, I literally need you to be honest, because if I'm not meant to be doing this, I have bills to pay. I can't keep trying to do something. Skill set or my talent. The problem is, do people perceive me as a leader? And if what I want something and lead it. P.S. That is so hard. Like, at no point in any of the inspirational conversations did anyone say, and you're just not going to sleep very much for the next 7 years. No one said that. It's probably a good thing they didn't. I would have been I love sleep. I would have been so upset by that. Instead, though, it was and so, like, I just think it's really important to note that to get experience, you have to get hired. In order to get hired, you have to fit into preconceived notions of what editors look like and behave like. Like, there's just so many steps where people are either self-selecting or actually being excluded from this industry, which means that they're and that's the reality of being a woman of color in Canadian media, is that it's really, really hard to do that, and lots of people leave.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for like that honest feedback and like sharing, because I know that it's not always easy to like sit in front of folks and share your story. I think it's inspiring in a lot of ways, though. I appreciate that you like acknowledge privilege, but also acknowledge like the nuance of what it means to have power, to have privilege. But also, like, you worked really hard to create
I did.
Friday
oh yes.
things.
Okay, I do work very hard. That is also part of it. Kim is always like, "Hey," she'll text me, and then 4 days later, I'll be like, "Hi, I love you."
Yeah.
I was just answering emails.
And so I like that you know, bit earlier about how you didn't choose, it was kind of like a realization. And so once you realized, okay, I'm going to start Friday things, like what did that journey look like? Like, what are maybe some tips that you could give folks who are looking to kind of move into doing some independent pieces?
Totally. So I would say the biggest thing to know is that it's actually really possible. Dollars a year on everything, on newsletter hosting, on my like, not necessarily, I have like aesthetic decisions that I'm making that mean I'm spending a little bit more, but like in real life, my newsletter hosting, my website hosting, my domain name, like that's not very expensive. So the economic barriers are quite low. There are lots and lots of tools that are available. I would say the biggest challenge for me, actually, like I'm a very good researcher. I will Google everything. So that's not that hard. It was the part where it becomes so much easier when you can depend on your network. And so we all have really talented people in our networks who actually want to help us. And sometimes I feel like I have to do this on my own for it to be real. But from the very beginning, a friend of mine from the gym, she's not even in journalism. I just told her how I was feeling, and she was like, I think you should do this. And also, I'm going to help you. She's a graphic designer. So she's the reason Friday Things looks like it does. I had friends who would like spitball ideas or talk through like on a Thursday, because I always write Friday Things on the night before. So on a Thursday, I'll ask somebody to talk through my newsletter with me. Like there's so many people who are willing to help, or people. And I think the other thing that's important to know is that you time or budget, or because I also have a full-time, like I'm writing and editing and teaching and doing all these other things, so I can't actually execute every idea I have. Some of it is like staggering what you're doing and being flexible in your own mind about what it is that you're creating. So I had this idea, my initial idea for Friday. So I was like, well, I'm just going to execute that on my own. But now, having done this for 3 years, I didn't really think about video in that way. I was thinking about like a daily content website. That's what I was working towards. I was going to start with a newsletter because I know how to write, and I did not know how to produce a podcast, and I did not have time to learn. So I was going to write this thing, and I started by just getting in the habit of writing this thing every Thursday night. And then I started doing social media, and then I started like doing more on social media in terms of like actual social specific content. And I always, in all of that, I thought what I was working towards was a daily like pop culture entertainment women's lifestyle news website. I don't actually want to do that anymore. I started doing video series, I started doing events, I've started doing all of these other things, and the ultimate version of your plan from the very first day, you can build up to that, and also your plan can change, and that's also totally fine.
I love that. I love just going back a little bit. I love the idea of like the power of community. It is so important to have networks, and also that it is okay to ask for help from your networks. Like people, I love that you said it, because people are so excited to help. People have ideas.
Yes.
And people like, you know, when you love someone, when you care about someone, when you respect someone, you want to see them shine. So I love that. I love that you kind of highlighted the power of the community and, you know, being able to ask folks for help. And I also love the idea of like fluidity, right? Like we can think
Like some of what I just, oh, you have to be flexible and roll with the punches and whatever. You do, absolutely. But it's also, you have to accept that you can maybe do more than you thought you could. So all those things that were scaring you before, which like, this is just all the things that scare me all the time. It turns out maybe I can do them.
Yeah, and I saw this quote the other day. It was something like, your first shot isn't great, your first speech isn't great, but you can't have your 100th until you have your first.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that's also true for work. Like there's going to be opportunities where we're like, oof, I don't think I can do that. And then you do it and you're like, it was okay. But if you do it again, and then again, and then again.
Yes, 100%. Right?
Media is independent, and I was wondering if you could like break that down for us a little bit.
Yes. So I wrote this piece. Really, sometimes a newsletter is just what I need to hear for myself. So that was
a Dear Diary moment.
It was like, all right, you are freaking out. Let's be logical about this. So it was a difficult time in Canadian media. It was right before Meta started blocking Canadian news on different social publications. There were just all of these different things that were happening. There were huge layoffs going on, and everyone around me was very discouraged. And I wrote this newsletter that was kind of asking the question, like, maybe this ongoing perception we have of journalism, that it's like not profitable and that it's always dying. Like journalism has been dying since 1982. So that idea, like that kind of panic is not a new one. Maybe that is actually a symptom and it's not the actual problem. And my thesis is that legacy publications that have tons of budget, and that's who venture capitalist funders and investors are interested in funding. And that's maybe not who we should be looking at. Who we should be looking at are the people who are doing things like me or the West End Phoenix or the Green Line or all of these different publications that are small and independent and nimble and who are trying to do journalism in a different way. So for me, a big part of Friday Things is that I'm trying to change the ethics of journalism that I kind of learned as I was coming up. They aren't always very good at intersectionality. They're not very good at I think that is that we have these rules that are really around objectivity and being unbiased without acknowledging that the default kind of whiteness and maleness of journalism is biased.
Right.
And so what I'm trying to do with Friday Things is to really detangle those things. But there are, and other people are doing the same kind of thing. They're trying to pay people fairly. They're trying to kind of eliminate the exploitation that's a big part of Canadian journalism and journalism in North America in general. And so I'm finding hope by looking at those people who are really excited about what they're doing, who are really dedicated to doing things in a different way, and who are doing it. But it requires us to also rethink our idea of success. So if our idea of success is to look like the legacy publications, we are not actually going to be able to do what we want to do. And so for me, I just really like the idea that we're going to save ourselves. Like there's not someone else who's going to come in a little bit more about sustainable success, and maybe we're not trying to deliver $100 million return on investment for a VC funder that doesn't actually care about journalism, but instead saw this as a potential way to make $100 million. Like maybe we do things in a different way and it turns out differently. So that's where I was going with that.
I think that's the soundbite right there. Like, we are going to save us.
I love that. I say it to myself all the time. Like I wrote this in a different newsletter, but I was like, on TikTok, all the TikTok girls it's not working in my favor. But I really, really believe in other people. I believe in us. I believe in community. I believe in the people who are actually getting things done and making things and doing things. That's who the trust in the TikTok girlies and the crystals.
I also, it's really resonating with me, the idea of what is sustainable success and what is success. Like, let's unpack it for ourselves around what we have determined success to be, and let's pick something that's sustainable and that's meaningful and that goes back to things like community or the things that we believe in, right? Like, it's not always return on investment and having the most accolades. It really is that network that you can turn to. Like, that's success. It's being proud of yourself. Like, that's success. So,
and what kind of life that you are living. Like, I think I very much bought in improving, and now I'm tired. So I'm thinking about maybe a different way. Like, I think for me, a full life is not one where I only think about work, where I only do work. And that's part of my definition of success too. Like, obviously we live in a capitalist society, and also I really love fancy cheese. So like, there's gotta be, and like travel and wine. So there's gotta be some focus placed on that kind of traditional idea of success. But at the same time, I never want to be a person who my friends can't depend on.
Right.
Because I'm sending emails, which is most of my job. Like, that is not the vibe.
Right.
So it's finding that balance, I think.
So like, hashtag, we are no longer girl bossing. We are finding sustainable success.
A little bit long, but I like it.
And so, we have a lot of students here.
I think the first thing to understand is that like being good at this is kind of your baseline. Like you're going to be a good writer, you're going to be a good editor. Even if you're not brilliant today, you're going to keep practicing and get better. Like that's not actually the most important thing. I think the most important thing is stubbornness. And I've thought this since I graduated, like if you are really stubborn and keep trying, it's going to pay off. And that is not a small thing. There are, especially if you're a person of color, especially if you have any sort of intersecting identities, there are going to be lots of people and situations that make you want to give up. And as long as you still like really love this thing and want to do it and believe in what you're doing, you just self-care and what success looks like and how we do that and whatever. But I genuinely believe that the key part of success for and I'm saying that I think for us, like there are a lot of people within Canadian media who have lots of privileges that we don't have. There are lots of people who have opportunities that we're not going to get, or whose parents also work in media. And so some people are definitely starting out a little bit further along than most of us are. But for anybody, even if you have those opportunities, like it's still stubbornness. Everyone's like, especially in the current kind of ecosystem and economic ecosystem, everyone's a good writer. Being a good writer is a overarching system that does not time where these voices are the most important things. Like we need our insight in order to contextualize what is happening in the world around us. It's not like a nice to have, it's actually necessary. And so your voice and your perspective and your insight and your experience is necessary to the continuing success or existence of journalism. So like remember that when you feel like giving up. I think that's the most important thing. And also, I would say on a very, very practical note, editor who like don't spell check, too high. The number of the number of writers that I work with who don't file on time or who don't follow the instructions that I've given them as an editor, like those things are so basic, and doing them puts you so far ahead of everyone else who's out there. Like I can work with you on the voice and does that match the tone of the publication and do you maybe need a better anecdote? But if I have to do the reporting myself, I can't work with you again. I can't do it. Not because I don't like you or don't want to. I just don't have the like time. Everyone's on such a time crunch. So hand in clean copy, be professional, follow, like make sure that you're delivering what your editor wants. Ask if you don't know. Make sure that you're delivering really strong, well-reported, accurate copy. Be available to edit. You're being fact-checked. Like all of these things that seem so boring and so unimportant, those are the things that will get you the relationships. If editors know they can depend on you, me for a copywriting job, I have no idea who this person is. I have no idea. But it's been huge for my career. Well, it's been huge for my bank, yeah. But like that's important. I got to pay my bills. So when you do really good, solid work and people can depend on you, then they will. I genuinely do think, and maybe this is like silly of me to say, but I just think this, or earnest of me to say, I think for the most part, people want to help you out. Like, this person's great. Most people, I think, will take it. So show them that you're great, and that is how you build your career.
I love here that you've used the word professionalism, but to talk about like the actual functions of a job, because I think sometimes the word professionalism can come with a lot of
absolutely
nuance. And
absolutely.
So I love that you kind of use that word as like
anyone who follows Friday Things knows that I don't subscribe to white supremacist traditional ideas of professionalism. I don't really care what you're wearing. I don't care if you swear. I do not shy away from sharing my political beliefs. I do not expect you to shy away from sharing your political beliefs. Those things are not very interesting to me. But spell check is. Spelling things correctly as a journalist, very important. And so, yes, I'm so glad you clarified that. When I say professionalism, I mean like do your job well.
Yes.
I'm not worried about how you look or what you believe or any of the other ways that especially marginalized folks are kind of controlled by ideas of professionalism.
And I think that kind of like segues really well into the next question. I know with Friday Things, you shared a little bit about just like what so again, if you haven't followed Friday Things, please do. But I'd love like talk about inequity, misogyny, like these kind of topics that you cover in Friday Things.
So I think two things. The first is that this is just who I am. Like from the time I was like, this is just who I am. If you've known me for as long as Kimma has, you know that I always have these thoughts. This is how I see the world. I haven't always felt empowered to bring that into my professional work. And I think that's in large part because that is not the way journalism is structured. We are told, so on one hand, we are told that, especially at the very beginning of my career, that things like race and gender and sexuality and ability the message of, so I came up in lifestyle media, so not in hard news, but in women's magazines. And so that type of journalism has historically been devalued for a lot of racist, misogynist reasons. And even though that is the space where I have seen the most interest and attention and care paid to covering intersectionality, sometimes gets lumped in with like, oh, well, they're just talking about fashion. So like, first of all, that's sexist. Fashion is important for a lot of different reasons. Second of all, fashion is the site of like 1,500 labor issues right now. So there's a lot to talk about. Are my perfect example. When people are like, I don't not paying close attention to what people are doing and what it says about the world and like all of those things. All of that being said, I didn't feel like empowered to talk about these things until I started my own thing. So even though I had been writing about, also I saw the metrics. I saw that people wanted that content. I didn't feel empowered to like be fully myself until I had my own thing to do it in. And so whenever someone says that they read Friday Things and it sounds like me, it's the biggest compliment because that's my goal. I want people to hear me in everything that means. Like I want to be heard and seen. On which the best Chris in Hollywood is, and all of these things that are like not serious. We think is important as a society, what we will invest in, and that has real, like, practical implications for many different people in this world. So I don't know if that was like a very rambly. That wasn't an answer that I had planned.
No,
I just went
really
off
great.
Okay, good.
Voice needs to be heard, and that's your advice for everyone. Like our voices are needed, like our thoughts are needed, like our very powerful. Like
100%.
right, words become things.
Yes.
Yeah.
They become actions and they become policies and laws.
Yes.
And so the idea that us like that we shouldn't tell our stories or that we shouldn't talk about the things that are important to us, it's like so misguided, because I think that actually not just disempowers us, but it sort of empowers the traditional, the patriarchal, the white supremacist systems that we exist. Like that's what upholds them.
I want to say that I was like one of the first people to follow Fred.
And I think a thing that I've had to realize is like a Friday Things newsletter is 2,000 to 3,000 words. It's really long. Like not everyone, many people do not want to read 3,000 words on like Britney or the Kardashians or media criticism or whatever. And so I did sometimes, and I maybe do sometimes struggle with like, do I make this more digestible for people? And every time I'm like, I don't want to. Yeah, I want to write what I want to write. And so it's really huge, and I'm always very proud. I think sometimes there is that feeling of not competition, but like comparison, to say, okay, well, there are other brands and they're way bigger and they're doing way more things and they have like these opportunities to get, I don't know, corporate sponsorships or whatever, and I'm not necessarily building a thing that is in that space. And so there is an element of like, I'm very, very proud, but I'm also trying. That's part of the like rethinking what success means.
Right. But do you, like, I'm glad you say you're proud, because you should be.
I am. I'm very, very proud. I don't ever want to.
But do you ever look back to the beginning and be like, wow, like, look how far this journey has.
All my metrics. So I was looking back at the first year, and 80 people read the first newsletter. And I was like, and I knew all of them, like for sure, I knew every single one of those people. And now there's like more than 2,000 people who subscribe to Friday Things, and it's like, it doesn't fully make sense in my brain to be like, oh, and some of them are like, a lot of those people are strangers. They're not doing this because they like know me in my life and they love me.
I mean, it adds value every Friday for me. So
good.
I think I'm going to pause there. I think we have an opportunity for folks here to ask a question if they have one.
Yeah, maybe. Or share a thought, feelings. I'm down for anything, really. You're both going to have to go eventually. Now I've seen you. Yes. I'm doing this?
So sorry, 1 second, Stacey. I'm just going to repeat the question on the mic for folks who are joining us online. No worries. Thank you. So the sentiment was around that Stacey's done a lot of story sharing, which has been amazing. The ebbs and flows, the good and bad. Does Stacey have a memory of kind of like that moment where you're like, go me?
Honestly, I don't know that I do. Not because I'm not proud of myself, but because I am actually actively trying to stop thinking of like, okay, what's next? Like I'm trying to do a better job of stopping and being really proud. I think one moment that I don't know that it made me think like, oh, I'm doing this, but I was like so proud. For a National Magazine Award for Best Newsletter. And for someone who I've built so much of my career trying to like not need industry validation because I don't often get it. That was still a moment where I was like, okay, you shouldn't be as excited as you are. You're still like, without this validation, you're still doing cool things, but it was really, really cool to be recognized for, and like a thing that I am building completely on my own with my own dollars and my own time. And I don't have, as much as I do have a really strong network and community to rely on, no one else is writing the newsletter at 1 a.m. on Thursday. but someone who is related to me, I can. But like no one else is there doing that. No one's contributing any money. Like there's so much support, but at the end of the day, this is the first thing that I've built by myself in that way. And so that's probably the moment I would think of the most. Actually, I'm really glad you asked that question because I don't know that I would have like recognized it myself. So I'm glad that you made me. So thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions?
Did you have a question? No? Okay. Yeah. Yes.
Thanks for that comment. I think that the sentiments were around that oftentimes in journalism you have to be very concise, and while technical aspects are important, we're having some like thoughts or reflections here around is that we dive into nuance, like we move out of binaries, right? It's not this or that, it's asking questions, it's exploring. And so, yeah, maybe you could touch a little bit about like nuance and how that plays a part in what you do.
Totally. I also, before I do that, I just want to affirm what you were saying about like the technical skills are important. I feel like this is a situation where you learn those rules so that you know how and when you can break them later. So I do think it's important to understand why journalism functions the way it does and how to do these things. Like not every newsletter needs to be 3,000 words. I can acknowledge that. Sometimes I'm just like, okay, but one more piece of research, just one more. That will like really convince people. I could rein myself in a little bit. But that skill set, like being able to learn really good reporting skills, really good, like being able to summarize, being able to synthesize information, being able to understand them, even when you get to the point where you're learning about fact checking and you learn that like, okay, is each fact, is the name spelled correctly? Is that the right age? Did that happen on that day and time? There's that level of fact checking, but there's also, do all of these things that we have said in these sentences, do they add up to the truth of the story? Where I am, and I'm going to refer to myself, and I'm going to disclose all of my biases, whether they're about from that you're totally right. In terms of nuance, I think where we fall or where we get into trouble a lot of times in Canadian media and maybe in general, maybe just in our society, is this idea of like perfection. When in fact, almost everything in life is super complicated. Like I understand that I don't want my life to be complicated. It's just unfortunately that's the way the world works. So there's no winner or loser. There's no uniquely good person and uniquely bad person. We have to understand that like our lives are nuanced. Our lives are complicated. Sometimes we are contradictory. Sometimes the things that we believe are contradictory. And so I think my job is to be able to hold all of the things that can be true at once. I think where we get into trouble, especially the idea of the hot take, is like, I'm going to use my rhetorical skills and my journalism skills and my writing skills to make an argument, but that argument is not necessarily human. That argument does not necessarily take into account the fact that multiple sides or people are feeling pain, the fact that there is probably not just two sides, there might be like 700. And so the thing that I'm trying to do with Friday Things, and the thing I think we should do to be more human journalists, is like acknowledge nuance. Because I also think this is part of, it shapes our thinking. Like it shapes the way that we perceive other people, the way that we perceive communities that we don't belong to. It's the ability to hold nuance and to hold contradiction that allows us, I think, to be empathetic. And I also think none of those things are like mutually exclusive from journalism. Like I think journalism should be empathetic. It should be human. It should be striving for the truth as opposed to presenting both sides, because that's not the same thing. And that's where nuance comes in, I think.
There were a lot of great takeaways, hot takes. So sustainable success.
Yes.
Really thinking about what success means for you and figuring that out, leaning into your community, into your network, asking for help, bouncing ideas off of people that we trust, taking pauses to congratulate ourselves on our wins. And also like not necessarily always living in the binaries, right? Moving out into nuance and thinking about how empathy can show up more. Appreciate so much Friday Things and the joy that it brings to my life. So again, follow Friday Things if you haven't. So round of applause for Stacy Lee Kong.
Thank you so much for having me and for questions and for like being so engaged.
And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Happy Career Month. Make sure that you check out our Fireside Chat with Stacy Lee Kong. Additionally, you'll see a little QR code on the screen here. So if you folks want to scan that, it's going to take you to a quick survey. And you can also possibly win a gift card. So thank you everyone once again, and we'll see you at the next event.